There is a moment in your life when you look in the mirror and realize you are carrying a weight you never agreed to hold. It's a heaviness that has nothing to do with the physical. It is a story that didn't start with you, but somehow it became your responsibility to finish. You look at the lines of your face, the way you hold your shoulders, the way your eyes dart toward the door. When a room gets too loud and you realize you are a walking museum of someone else's unresolved history, maybe you've never spoken it out loud. Maybe you've buried it under a mountain of productivity or a shell of calmness. But deep down, the truth is vibrating in your marrow. The person you became, or the person you are terrified of becoming, or is tied to the man who raised you, or the man who didn't. This isn't about blame. Blame is a loud, distracting emotion that stops us from seeing clearly. This is about something much quieter, something you feel when you're alone at 3:01 a.m. and every distraction has faded, leaving only the question you've avoided for years. Why do I feel so weak? Why do I struggle with boundaries that seem so simple for others? Why do I keep fighting invisible battles that no one else can see? Today, we are performing a psychological autopsy on the father wound. We are exploring the architecture of submission, the biological cost of walking on eggshells, and the terrifying realization that your personality might actually be a collection of survival traits designed to protect you from a man who should have been your shield. A father does not just raise a child, he raises their inner voice. When you fail, whose voice do you hear? When you are about to take a risk, what does the whisper in the back of your mind say? For many, that voice is a direct inheritance. A father is the first God a child knows. He defines the parameters of reality. He teaches you through his presence or his absence, whether the world is a place where you can rise or a place where you must shrink. If your father raised you with silence, you didn't just learn to be quiet. You learned to silence your own needs before they could even reach your throat. If he raised you with anger, you learned to walk on emotional eggshells. You learned to become a master of mood mapping. You memorized the exact pitch of his footsteps on the stairs, the way the front door closed, the vibration of his voice before a storm hit. You were learning how to read him instead of learning how to understand yourself. You were learning how to navigate his emotional puzzles instead of building your own internal compass. Psychologists call this emotional overcompensation. Your mind reorganized your nervous system to survive. You developed a hyper-awareness that others mistake for intuition, but it's a biological scan for threat. You were trained to breathe in a world built by someone else's fears. And here is where the weakness begins to calcify. Survival mode changes the brain. That's neuroscience. When your childhood is defined by survival mode, your brain stays in a state of chronic HPA axis activation. Your stress pathways are burned deep. You enter the world and wonder why you feel so unsure. You wonder why you crumble under the slightest pressure. It's because your nervous system was never allowed to come down. You are still bracing for an impact that happened 20 years ago. This leads to a profound duality. On the outside, you might appear capable, composed, even wise. People call you the strong one. But the inner world knows someone who is tired, sensitive, and quietly overwhelmed. You have become a master of social mimicry to appear sane, while underneath your foundation is made of sand. And unuttered screams. We misunderstand weakness. We think it's a lack of character, but it is an inherited blueprint. Think about the specific rules your father wrote into you without saying a word. Rule 1, your joy comes second to his stability. Rule 2, admitting a mistake is an invitation for judgment. Rule 3, never ask for help because people are unpredictable. Rule 4, stay small. Being seen as being a target. You survived these rules as a child. They kept you safe. They kept the peace. But now you are an adult, and you have forgotten that you are no longer in that house. You've taken those survival strategies and given them different names. You learned emotional freezing as a child, and now you call it indecision. You learned self-doubt early, and now you call it humility. You learned to avoid conflict at all costs, and now you call it being a peacemaker. You learned to depend on no one, and now you call it strength. But look at how much of that has collapsed under you. Look at how disconnected you feel. Look at the guilt you feel the moment you try to rest. You aren't choosing these behaviors. They were chosen for you by a man who mistook seriousness for strength, or confusion for protection. For some, the father wound isn't a tyrant, it's a ghost. When a father is absent, he leaves a vacuum, and the human mind hates a vacuum. A child not mirrored by their father will spend their entire life looking for their reflection in strangers. They become the performance artist. They work 16-hour days to earn a well done that will never come. They chase validation like oxygen because they believe worth must be proven, not felt. They give until they are empty, hoping usefulness will make them unabandonable. They become the anchor for everyone else while their own life is slipping away. This isn't confidence, it's a shield. It's the safest option in an unsafe world. You might feel stuck today, not because you lack ability, but because you lack permission. You are waiting for the man who shaped your inner voice to tell you it's okay to be loud. It's okay to be honest. It's okay to fail, but he might never say it. He was likely raised by a tyrant or a ghost himself. He inherited a chain, and he simply passed the next link to you. Does that excuse the pain? No, but it explains the architecture. Once you see the blueprint, you realize the walls aren't as solid as you thought. You've been living in a prison with an unlocked door, but what if the air is actually freedom? We are entering a turning point, the anatomy of permission. To break a chain, you first have to feel its weight. You've followed a registry of invisible rules written inside your nervous system. These rules are why you feel like a fraud when you succeed and a criminal when you rest. Those rules were never designed to help you live. They were designed to help you survive him. Look at the ledger. Keep everything inside. Don't burden anyone. Handle it yourself. Stay predictable. These rules taught you how to function, but they didn't teach you how to feel. You adapted to a war zone, but you didn't learn how to become yourself. Surviving is not the same as growing. For many, strength was just a name for numbness. You aren't unshakable. You're just in a state of functional freeze. The first act of emotional rebellion is realizing you have been waiting for a permission slip that isn't coming. You've been waiting for him to look at you and say, I see you. You are enough. But if he is a tyrant, he won't give it. If he is a ghost, he isn't there to see. The path to strength begins with the process of individuation. Agonizing as it is, you must separate your identity from your upbringing. Look at your inner critic, the voice that calls you weak and shames your vulnerability. Realize that isn't my voice. That's an echo. It is the echo of a man who never learned how to speak kindly to himself. When you realize that, the God in your mind begins to shrink into a man. There is a moment in therapy where you finally see your parent clearly. Not as the monster who crushed you, and not as the hero who failed you, but as a person. To heal, you have to look at your father's own inherited chain. See the man shaped by his own fears, his own doubts, and his own lack of tools. Maybe he mistook seriousness for strength because he was never allowed to play. Maybe he confused control with protection because he grew up in chaos. Maybe he believed silence was maturity because he was punished for his words. Understanding this doesn't excuse the damage, but it explains everything. Explanation is the first step toward awareness. Awareness is the first form of freedom. Once you see him as a flawed, limited human, he loses his power to define your worth. His disapproval wasn't a reflection of your inadequacy. It reflected his own limitations. He couldn't give you what he didn't have. He couldn't model a strength he never found. This is the beginning of your emotional evolution. You are the first generation to have the words for this pain. You have the awareness he lacked, and that awareness is the most powerful weapon you possess. You start noticing the moments where you act out of habit rather than truth. You notice when you're about to over-explain yourself or shrink your presence. In that tiny invisible pause, the heartbeat between stimulus and response, you choose a new direction. You stand your ground calmly. You ask for help without feeling like a burden. You let yourself rest without checking the unwritten ledger of earned productivity. These are small acts, but they are the bricks of a new architecture. You are building a life based on alignment, not compliance. We return to the mirror. You look at your reflection again. But this time, you don't look for the inherited chain. You look for the person beneath the conditioning. You were never weak because of your father. You only believed you were. What you called weakness was the most sophisticated adaptation your young mind could create. You were a brilliant architect of your own survival, but you have outgrown the fortress. It is time to step out into the light. Real strength is not the absence of emotion. It's the presence of awareness. It is the courage to be real in a world that rewarded masks. It is the decision to live a life that is honest, even if it's messy. Recognizing that your inner critic isn't your voice. It's an echo from someone who never learned how to speak kindly to themselves. And that realization is the beginning of maturity. Because growing up isn't just about paying bills or becoming independent. Growing up is the slow, sometimes painful process of separating identity from upbringing. It's learning to look at the emotional rules you inherited and asking, does this still serve me? It's discovering that strength doesn't come from repeating old patterns. It comes from breaking them. And maybe that's where you've been stuck for years. Not because you lack ability, but because you've never questioned the invisible rules your childhood wrote inside you. Rules like, keep everything inside. Don't burden anyone. Handle everything yourself. Stay quiet. Stay polite. Stay stable. Stay predictable. Don't disappoint. Don't express too much. Don't ask for help. Don't be too much. Don't be too honest. Don't show weakness. But look at what those rules cost you. They taught you how to endure, but not how to live. They taught you how to function, but not how to feel. They taught you how to adapt, but not how to become yourself. They taught you how to avoid breaking down, but not how to build up. You survived your childhood patterns, but surviving isn't the same as growing. Questioning the rules you inherited will feel like betrayal, but it is necessary for growth. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because your mind associates those rules with safety. They protected you once. They kept the peace. They kept you from conflict. They kept you from judgment. They kept you from discomfort, but you're not that child anymore. And the threats you prepared for don't exist anymore. Yet a part of you still lives as if they do. That's why you avoid difficult conversations. That's why you struggle with expressing emotion. That's why you feel nervous when someone asks what you really want. That's why you hesitate before speaking your mind. That's why you feel responsible for the feelings of everyone around you. That's why you overthink even small decisions. That's why you close off when you most need connection. That's why you shrink when the moment calls you to rise. That's why you chase validation instead of truth. That's why you exhaust yourself trying to be the version of you that keeps everyone comfortable. These are not random habits. They are inherited self-protection mechanisms. But there comes a moment, quiet, often unexpected, when you realize the life you're living isn't the life you truly want. It's the life you learn to maintain. And maintaining something that never belonged to you is the most exhausting thing in the world. So let me ask you something gently but directly. When was the last time you asked yourself who you would be if you weren't trying to meet his standards? Not the ideal father, but the father he actually was. Who would you be if you weren't trying to avoid his disapproval? Who would you be if you stopped living in the emotional shadow of his silence and expectations? Maybe this is the moment you realize your weakness isn't lack of strength. It's lack of permission. Permission you've been waiting your whole life to receive without realizing you can grant it to yourself. You can outgrow the environment that shaped you. You can evolve beyond the patterns you inherited. You can become someone your father never had the chance to become. You can heal wounds he never acknowledged. You can break cycles he didn't know how to escape. Real change is slower, quieter. It comes from small shifts repeated consistently. It happens the moment you pause before shrinking, the moment you ask for help without feeling guilty. These moments build a new internal voice, one that sounds more like you. You were never weak because of your father. You only believed you were. What you called weakness was the first step toward becoming stronger than the generation before you.